Okay, so I'm going to start by kind of plunking in kind of the non-dominant colors in the rocks. So I see some orange, I see some green, and I'm just working on the foreground rocks in this demo. Then, since I've already blocked in my shadows, I'm going to take this light purple color and kind of use that for the lighter areas of the rocks. And so as I'm applying this, I'm using different techniques like scumbling, hatching, and varying my pressure based on how light or dark the areas that I'm applying it to are. Okay, and then I kind of work back and forth between that and the color, this like dark blue that I'm using for my shadows area. And so just working with the contour, looking at the texture of the rock. Sometimes I use my pencil on its tip to really create some cracks in the rocks. It really depends on the texture of your rock and how you're going to do that, but you want to get an overall feel for what kind of techniques you need to put in there, hatching, scumbling, etc. Okay, and so I sharpened my pencil so I could get some more defined lines and textures in there. That's what's really going to make the rock look edgy, depending on what kind of rock you have. If you have a more like a smoother rock, then you might work more on like applying value that gradually wraps around the form with like gradation and changing the colors as it reflects kind of different colors on the surface. My rocks are kind of a combination of like smooth surfaces with some cracks and some jagged edges. And so I have a bunch of techniques that I'm applying here. Hatching comes in where there's like a lot of like kind of like chipped areas of the rocks. Scumbling comes in kind of where the waves have kind of crashed against the rocks and kind of carved out this very like bumpy texture at like the base of them. But now I am starting to do some accenting in addition to adding the textures that I put on to the rocks in the foreground here. And that is just going to help make the forms pop more because the light source, the sun is so strong. I do need to go in with some brown over top of my blue to make the shadows really nice and dark to create that strong light source. Now I'm taking the white, which actually works really well for blending. They do make these things called colorless blenders for colored pencils, but I would imagine that you probably don't have those available to you right now. So if you have a white colored pencil or even like a light colored pencil that makes sense for the colors of your rocks, you can go into the smooth areas and kind of like basically just blend colors really well. I'm using a lot of pressure when I'm applying the white to do this. Okay, and then I'm just going to go back and just add more darks in there with my darkest pencils, making the textures kind of more punctuated, more accented. And that's the basics of rocks. Okay, so now I'm going to demonstrate water. And so with water, you need to think about depth too. And the depth is going to take place with a change in value. So if you look at my water, the lighter values of the water in the foreground, and then there's darker values of water in the background. And so a shift from light to dark or dark to light, depending on what you see in your landscape, is something you want to just think about in terms of depth. So I'm just kind of going through and just adding some more like, saturation to some of the colors right now and just kind of blocking them in a little bit more on like the heavier side with my colored pencil. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to start doing some broken color textures. And so the textures that are in the foreground are going to be bolder. I am looking at the photo for reference for this to figure out like what colors and how bold the lines should be and when they should start to get smaller and closer together into the background. And so you'll see me kind of shift from like tiny little dashes in places, like almost even little dots in the very background to like longer, more spread out dashes kind of in the foreground and in the middle ground. So I do look at the colors of what I think that broken color should be, and I'm definitely working more with a analogous color scheme right now. So blue, blue-green are kind of, maybe a little bit of blue-violet in there too, are the colors that I'm focusing on. Okay, and now I'm going to take the white and kind of go through, add some foreground textures, but I'm also going to use the white to kind of blend again. So the harder you press, the more it's going to blend the colors together. It will make the colors lighter, but it can soften some areas where maybe you need your broken color to blend a little bit more in the background. You can also go in and add the white for like splashes kind of against the shore and things like that. I'm not going to do the whole piece right now, but I'm going to go through and kind of blend some areas and also add some foreground texture. Okay, and so now I need to get like that white texture that's the water like washing up on the sand. And so I'm going through with a white colored pencil, creating a hard line. And then up against that white line, I kind of need to create some contrast with this like sandy color that I have. I'm also going to go in with a dark brown and kind of almost like outline around the white texture, just to kind of reinforce and add that detail in there some more. Especially in the foreground, you want that to be pretty contrasty. You want it to pop. So if you have anything like that in your water, that's something that you can consider doing, is just kind of like using the white colored pencil really hard, creating the like, the white water, and then working up to the edge of that white water with a contrasting tone will really help. So just again, the broken color, look at the colors that you see in your water to choose that. If you have a sunset, you're going to have different colors than what I have, because your water will reflect the warm tones of the sun. Okay, and so just a close-up of that white water kind of crashing up against the shore. You can see how I'm taking this brown colored pencil, really nicely sharpened, to outline that white texture, the like foamy part of the water, to make it show up a little bit better. So that was a little bit of a challenge for me because I should have left the paper a little bit more white in that area, but pressing hard with the white colored pencil and then working around it to reinforce it is definitely helping. Okay, so just to wrap up, make sure that you're looking for the colors that you see in your landscape, thinking about illusion of depth, having more contrast, more detail, bigger textures, bolder textures in the foreground, more saturated colors in the foreground. Things should dissipate and become less contrasty. Textures should get smaller as you get towards the background. And then don't be afraid to use your white to blend, and then adding some accenting by pumping up the contrast in the foreground is a good way to go about this. So observe the textures that you see in your rocks and your water, and observe the colors that you see in your rocks and your water if you have them in your landscape, and then go ahead and apply what I've shown you here to your landscape.